There's a sign that almost always points to a psychopath. Now, it might be really obvious from the outside or even in retrospect if it happened to you, but it's important to understand that there are actual brain reactions that are caused by abuse and trauma that could stop you from realizing the gravity of the situation in the moment. So this sign that almost always points out a psychopath is that they will put your life in danger through risky behavior. Now, what can this look like? This could be reckless driving, for example. Maybe you guys have gone out, you had a couple beers, and now he or she is driving you home. And on the way home, it's very dark outside, it's nighttime, there's very little lighting but the lights of the car, and there's a lot of twists and turns in the road. So any normal person would approach that with caution. One, because you've had a couple beers, and two, because of the road conditions. It's night, it's dark, the road is winding and twisting. Now, the psychopath is going to lay on the gas, accelerate straight ahead as if they're going to go straight into a wall. And at the very last minute, they're going to make that turn. The car's going to screech. They're going to almost lose control, and you're going to be terrified. Then they're going to laugh at you because you're terrified and you're upset and you're asking them to calm down and to slow down, right? So any normal person who makes a mistake driving is obviously going to own up to it and not make fun of you and laugh at you because you're terrified because they just put your life in risk because they did. A normal person is not going to minimize that and try to confuse you and make you think that something's wrong with you for feeling that that's not okay. So that's one example. Surely there's lots more. Now, why would a psychopath do this? Why would they put your life at risk through risky behaviors? One, it's part of their irresponsibility. They are completely incapable of accepting self-responsibility, which means that you and anyone around them is going to inevitably be harmed. So maybe you escaped harm that night in the car, thankfully, but maybe next time you won't be so lucky. Number two, I think some of them just can't feel fear, or they don't feel fear the way that most normal human beings feel it. Number three, because psychopaths like to create chaos, crisis, and confusion. And that's exactly what they're creating in those kinds of situations. Number four, psychopaths love to have control over other people by fabricating fears. So they have fabricated your fear. Your fear is very real. Your life was in danger, but they created that whole situation in order to make you feel terrified because that gives them a sense of control. Number five, since psychopaths can't really feel much emotionally, I think that they have a desire to feel the intensity of adrenaline rushes and dopamine hits because it's what makes them feel alive. I think furthermore, they create that situation so they can feel that, and also they're feeding off of your feelings. So your fear, your terror, the crisis, the confusion, all of that, they end up eating as a form of emotion, as a form of narcissistic supply. Number six, probably the most obvious one, is they just don't care about your well-being. Someone who does that sort of behavior and then mocks you and shames you and makes fun of you because you're upset that they did that and you're telling them to stop, that person doesn't give a crap about your well-being. Now, maybe your ex is the psychopath and maybe you have children with them. So maybe they no longer do this to you, but maybe they do this sort of thing to your children as a way of getting to you, as a way of getting narcissistic supply from your kids. So that's something you always want to be on the lookout for if you're co-parenting with someone like this. Now, I mentioned that you might not notice it in the moment. You might go along with it and minimize it in the moment and only later realize the gravity of the situation, either through a flashback and being away from that situation and being able to see it, or maybe you're telling somebody else the story and they're the ones that are like, oh my God, that is absolutely not okay. Why does that happen? What's going on inside the brain? The very first thing, and this is more the mind than the brain, is the gaslighting effect. So when the psychopath is shaming you, justifying what they're doing, they're gaslighting you to make you feel like you're crazy for reacting the way that you did, for feeling that that's unacceptable, for being terrified that they just put your life in danger. That kind of confusion can really trick yourself and trick your mind really into minimizing that situation, into justifying that it's okay because you're deferring to the reality of that other person. Now, in terms of the brain, there's the amygdala hijack. Your amygdala, your anxiety switch is constantly on after you've been through the conditioning of an abusive relationship, even more so if you grew up in a childhood that was abusive. So if you got programmed to just understand that when your anxiety switch is constantly on, it's very difficult for you to recognize when suddenly there's something that's actually terrifying, anxiety-ridden going on, because you're so used to feeling anxiety that it feels like just a little bit of an anxiety spike, but not that much because you're so used to that. There's also the abuse amnesia. So this is when your hippocampus, which is another part of the limbic system, the amygdala being another part, the amygdala being the anxiety switch, which grows in neural connections and ends up robbing most of the energy of the brain functions as you've been conditioned to abuse. So the hippocampus loses energy, shrinks in neural connections. And then what happens is the hippocampus can no longer process short-term to long-term memory, which means your brain goes into denial. Your brain deletes the abuse that took place. So that's actually happening in your brain. Also, all of the stress hormones in your body. So you've been in an abusive relationship for a while, or especially if you've grown up that way, terror has been normalized. You have become desensitized to feeling terror because you're so used to feeling that. You're so used to those hormones being activated in your body that it just feels like a normal day. And finally, this one's more your mind than the body. You're so used to the extortion of trust that you just give it to people when they haven't earned it. So if you've been in a relationship for a long time, or you grew up in a family like that, they were always extorting your trust. They were always demanding that you trust them, even when it wasn't deserved or earned. And so you got so conditioned and groomed to believe that that was a normal thing, that when you're saying this isn't okay, this is absolutely unacceptable, you just put my life at risk, and they make fun of you, or they minimize it, they justify it, you then just kind of trust them because you've been so used to doing that. So it's really hard because all those things are going on in your mind and in your brain as a result of the abuse, grooming, and training. And that is not your fault. But it is really important that you try to become more mindful of these sorts of things so that you can recognize them in the moment, override all those systems that have been programmed in your brain, all of that mental programming that you've received, and to understand these kinds of behaviors are one and done. That person does not get a second chance. That person is not eligible for a 3-strike rule. One and done. Remind yourself, if you're looking back at those situations, and that could be a good way to reprogram yourself moving forward so that you learn to recognize and identify no way. Understand they're putting your life at risk. Next time could be much worse. Don't give them that opportunity. When things like this happen, it's important to talk to someone else about it, not the person who did it, because they're only going to gaslight you and put you back into that confusion. You need to talk to someone outside, someone who's able to recognize that as a completely unhealthy and unsafe behavior, so they can really help you understand just how dangerous that is to your life. Also, I encourage you to raise your standards in terms of what's acceptable, what behavior is acceptable, and set new boundaries for behavior that is unacceptable. So if something like that happened in your past, you want to go back and review that situation in your mind, not to beat yourself up for it, but so that you can learn from that and take with you a seed for growth. Understand in the future, that is absolutely unacceptable. And if someone puts your life in danger like that, you're done. And also, it's important to start learning, if you've been conditioned to that extortion of trust, it's important to start learning that trust is earned over time. You don't owe anybody immediate trust. And if somebody is trying to force you to trust them, and they even say the words like, you need to trust me, that should be a red flag in your mind because you don't know that person. They haven't earned that yet. Trust is earned over time through open, honest, communication, and observing of patterns of behavior. That's how you earn trust. You don't just hand it over to someone. If someone makes you feel like that, mark that as a red flag and be very careful, because probably right around the corner is one of these types of situations when they put your life at risk. Did something like this happen to you? If so, share an example in the comments to help somebody else who's trying to understand what this kind of behavior can look like in real life. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, give it a like or leave it a comment below. I'm sending you a big hug.